a luxury rooftop event in Los Angeles. City lights stretch endlessly below. Music, laughter, champagne glasses clinking. At the edge of the crowd, a man kneels beside a broken electrical panel. Daniel Hayes, 41, a single dad, just doing his job. No one notices him. He is invisible in a room full of diamonds. No one, except her, Victoria Laurent, the billionaire host. She watches him quietly. Not because he stands out, but because he doesn't try to. Minutes later, she walks over, looks into his tired eyes and whispers, "I wish you were mine." Daniel looks up, stunned. The secret begins now. True fate. Daniel Hayes was a man whose presence was measured not by the noise he made, but by the profound, steady silence he maintained, a shadow moving through the neon-drenched, high-speed corridors of Los Angeles. At 41, Daniel carried the air of someone who had long ago stopped trying to win the world's approval and had instead focused on winning the only heart that mattered, his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. He lived in a modest, sun-faded apartment in a part of the city where the grass was brown, the paint was peeling, and the neighbors knew each other's laundry schedules. His life was a meticulously constructed machine of routine. 5 a.m. black coffee, 6 a.m. school lunches with crustless sandwiches, and a 10-hour shift as a contracted high-end electrical technician for the city's most prestigious venues. He was the man who ensured the lights stayed on for people who never bothered to look at the person holding the wires. Daniel was not a man of grand ambitions or hidden bitterness. He was emotionally grounded, a widower who had buried his grief under the heavy, daily weight of responsibility. Since his wife, Sarah, passed away 4 years ago in a sudden tragedy, he had become the sole architect of Lily's universe. He didn't dream of Ferraris or glass-walled penthouses. He dreamt of Lily's science projects, working on the first try and being home in time to read her favorite stories about dragons and distant stars. He wore a simple navy blue work jacket with D. Hayes stitched in faded white thread. His hands were calloused, etched with the history of cold steel, and occasionally stained with the silver dust of copper wiring. His eyes carried a weary, peaceful clarity that suggested he had seen the bottom of the world and found a way to stand back up. He was a man who knew exactly who he was, and in a city like Los Angeles, where everyone was pretending to be someone else, that made him the most dangerous kind of anomaly. He was real. Every afternoon before his night shifts, Daniel would sit with Lily at their small wooden kitchen table. It was a sacred time. They would talk about her day, the complex mysteries of fourth-grade fractions, and her dreams of becoming an astronaut. "Dad," she once asked, looking at his grease-stained hands, "why do you always fix things for people who don't even say hello?" Daniel had smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips. "Because, Lily, the most important work in the world is the work that keeps the world running while everyone is busy looking at themselves. You don't need a spotlight to be a son." He taught her that value wasn't found in a price tag, but in the strength of one's word and the consistency of one's presence. He was raising a queen in a 3-room apartment, and he was content with the trade. Introduce Victoria Laurent. At 35, Victoria was the woman the world watched through a filtered, high-definition lens. She was a billionaire investor, a titan of venture capital, and the primary heir to a legacy that owned half the skyline Daniel worked in. She was powerful, admired, and perpetually surrounded by a rotating cast of sycophants, ambitious tech founders, and social climbers who treated her name like a holy relic. To the public, she was the Ice Queen, a distant, perfect figure who lived in a vacuum of luxury, traveling in armored sedans and speaking in the clipped, efficient tones of a person who bought and sold futures for breakfast. She hosted events like tonight's rooftop gala every month, moving through the crowds of silken velvet with a practiced, predatory grace. She was used to being the center of gravity, used to men performing for her attention, reciting rehearsed resumes and calculated compliments in the hopes of catching a shred of her influence. But behind the designer armor and the billion-dollar portfolio, Victoria Laurent was starving in a room full of banquets. She lived in a world of high-gloss artifice where every conversation was a transaction and every smile was a strategic move. She was exhausted by the noise. She was tired of people who looked at her and saw a dollar sign, a step up, or a headline. She was surrounded by the elite, yet she felt a bone-deep, echoing isolation that no amount of success could fill. She felt like a ghost haunting the halls of her own empire. Every night before these events, she would stand before her floor-to-ceiling mirror, dripping in millions of dollars of diamonds, and wonder if anyone in the room would recognize her if she walked in wearing a cotton t-shirt. She felt like a beautiful, expensive product on a shelf, and she was waiting for someone who wasn't a customer. That night, as the jazz band played a smooth, expensive melody and the scent of vintage wine filled the warm California air, Victoria's gaze drifted away from a CEO who was explaining his new AI-driven crypto mining operation. Her eyes landed on the edge of the terrace, near the service entrance. There, beneath a flickering outdoor light, was Daniel Hayes. He was kneeling on the cold stone floor, his heavy metal toolbox open beside him. He wasn't looking at the celebrities. He wasn't trying to catch a glimpse of the fashion models or the movie stars. He was focused entirely on a faulty circuit breaker that had caused a section of the ambient lighting to dim. His movements were precise, calm, and unhurried. He was a man working in the middle of a carnival, completely unbothered by the music, the fame, or the power surrounding him. Victoria watched him for longer than she should have. She noticed the way he wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a calloused hand. She saw the way his posture never shifted into a pose for the cameras. He didn't look like he wanted to be anywhere else. He looked like a man who took pride in a job well done, even if no one was watching. He possessed a gravity that the men in her inner circle lacked, a type of quiet, masculine dignity that couldn't be bought at a boutique on Rodeo Drive. That was the moment Victoria Laurent realized she was looking at the only real thing on that rooftop. And for the first time in years, she felt a spark of genuine, terrifying curiosity. She didn't want to know his net worth. She wanted to know what he was thinking while he looked at those copper wires. The gala continued to swirl around her like a digital simulation, a blur of expensive laughter and hollow promises. But Victoria's focus remained locked on the man in the navy jacket. She excused herself from a circle of tech investors with a sharpness that left them blinking in confusion, and she began to walk. She didn't walk toward the VIP lounge, the champagne fountain, or the bar. She walked toward the service panel. Her high heels clicked against the marble, a rhythmic countdown that Daniel didn't seem to notice until she was standing exactly 5 feet away. He finished tightening a final screw, flipped a heavy switch, and the outdoor lighting system hummed back to life, casting a warm, consistent glow over the terrace that made the diamonds in the crowd sparkle even brighter. Daniel stood up, exhaling a slow, satisfied breath. He began to pack his tools with a rhythmic efficiency, ready to disappear back into the service elevator and go home to his daughter. That's when Victoria stepped directly into his path. The contrast was a physical shock. She was a vision in a midnight blue silk and millions of dollars in diamonds. He was a man with grease on his cuff and a name tag that read D. Hayes. "You don't seem impressed by any of this," Victoria said. Her voice was direct, carrying the weight of someone used to being answered immediately. She gestured toward the crowd of celebrities and the sprawling LA skyline that looked like a carpet of diamonds below them. Daniel paused, his hand hovering over the handle of his toolbox. He looked at her, not with the wide-eyed awe she was accustomed to, and not with the desperate hunger of a man looking for an opportunity to pitch an idea. He looked at her with a calm, evaluating gaze that made Victoria feel suddenly, uncomfortably transparent. "It's a nice view," Daniel answered simply, his voice a low, grounding rumble. "But it's not my world." The answer intrigued her more than any business proposal she had heard in a decade. It wasn't disrespectful. It was honest. It was a statement of fact devoid of envy. "Most people would kill to have a seat at one of these tables," Victoria countered, stepping an inch closer. "They spend their entire lives trying to get past the security guard at the door. You're already here, and you're just fixing the wires." "Someone has to keep the lights on so the people at the tables can see their drinks," Daniel replied, a small, weary smile touching the corners of his mouth. "My world is about fixing things that break. This world seems to be about pretending things never do. I prefer the fixing. It's more honest." Victoria felt a strange, tightening sensation in her chest. She realized that Daniel Hayes was the first person in months who hadn't tried to market himself to her. He didn't mention a business idea. He didn't ask for a selfie. He treated her like a person who happened to be standing in front of him while he was trying to finish his shift. She saw his focus, his calm presence, and his complete indifference to the status she had spent her life maintaining. As he closed his toolbox and prepared to walk away, Victoria felt a sudden, frantic urge to stop him. She didn't want him to leave. She wanted to hold on to the stillness he carried, like a drowning person reaching for a solid dock. She watched him move toward the service entrance, a man who was leaving a billion-dollar party without looking back once. She realized that his life, however simple it might be, possessed a structural integrity that her own life lacked. He was the foundation. She was just the decoration on the top floor. She followed him into the shadows of the service hallway, away from the prying eyes of the guests and the flashes of the paparazzi. The music became a muffled, distant thud, filtered through heavy concrete. Here, in the unpolished concrete of the back hall, the power dynamic shifted. Victoria Laurent, the most powerful woman in the room, felt small. She looked at Daniel's broad back and realized that she had been searching for someone like him without even knowing he existed. She had been looking for a man who didn't need her. She called out his name, or rather the initial on his tag. Daniel. He stopped and turned, his expression curious but unbothered. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the scent of industrial cleaner and the distant, fading laughter of the party. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw the scars of a life lived, the depth of a father's love, and the unshakable peace of a man who owned himself. She felt her own corporate mask cracking, falling away like dry plaster. The Ice Queen was melting in a concrete hallway. That was when the words left her mouth before she could censor them. It wasn't a calculated move. It wasn't a seductive line meant to tease. It was a raw, desperate confession from a woman who was finally admitting her own hunger for something real. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the empty hall. I wish you were mine. The air in the service hallway seemed to freeze, the temperature dropping as the weight of Victoria's words settled between them. Daniel Hayes stayed perfectly still. He didn't drop his toolbox and he didn't stumble. He simply looked at her, his brow furrowing in a look of profound, stunned confusion. He was a man who understood how to wire a skyscraper, how to ground a circuit, and how to manage a daughter's fever. But he had no blueprint for this. He searched her face for a joke, for a hidden camera, or for the cruel whim of a bored socialite looking for a temporary thrill. But he found none of those things. He found only Victoria, vulnerable, breathless, and looking at him as if he were the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Excuse me? Daniel asked, his voice a low, cautious rumble. He was completely unprepared for this. He was a man who lived in the world of is and is not. Victoria Laurent was a woman who lived in the world of what if. Victoria didn't look away. She was past the point of pride now. The diamonds around her neck felt like a heavy chain. I'm serious, she said, her voice regaining a bit of its executive steel, but remaining remarkably soft. I wish you were mine. I wish I had a life where someone like you was the anchor. I wish I knew what it felt like to be seen by someone who isn't trying to steal a piece of my soul or buy a piece of my company. Daniel looked down at his calloused hands, then back at her. The silence stretched, heavy and emotional. Why? He asked finally. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of his entire life. Victoria stepped closer, the scent of her expensive French perfume clashing with the smell of the grease and metal on his jacket. Because you're real, Daniel. Because you're grounded in a way I've forgotten how to be. Because for the last hour I've watched you from across that roof, and you're the only person here who doesn't need anything from me. You have a daughter, don't you? I saw the sticker on your toolbox, a little yellow sun with the name Lily on it. I saw the way you touched it before you closed the lid. Daniel's expression softened at the mention of his daughter, and Victoria saw the truth of his character in that one flicker of emotion. Everyone around me is a shark, Daniel, she continued, her eyes glistening. They want my capital, my connections, or my name. But you just wanted to fix the lights. You remind me of a life I never had, A life of quiet routines, of home-cooked meals, and of being enough just because you're there. I've spent billions building a kingdom, but I realize tonight that I'm the only one living in it. My father built this empire, but he died alone in a hospital room because he forgot how to talk to anyone who didn't have a balance sheet. I don't want to be him. Daniel processed her words with the same methodical focus he used for a complex circuit. He saw the billionaire icon standing in front of him, but he also saw the lonely girl she was trying to hide behind the silk. He realized that Victoria wasn't flirting with him. She was mourning. She was looking at him as if he were a museum exhibit of a normal life, a rare artifact she wanted to acquire to solve her own emptiness. "You don't even know me, Victoria," Daniel said gently. "You're looking at a man in a work jacket and imagining a fairy tale. My life isn't a vacation from yours. It's hard work. It's worrying about the rent. It's being tired at 3 in the morning when my daughter has a nightmare about the dark. It's not a lifestyle you can just invest in to feel better about your own complexity." "I'm not looking for an investment," Victoria countered, her voice cracking. "I'm looking for a connection. I'm looking for something that won't disappear when the market crashes. I see the way you carry yourself. I see the way you talk about your work. You have a peace that I can't buy, no matter how many zeros are in my bank account. I've spent my life leading thousands of people, but I'm tired of walking alone at the end of the day." Daniel took a deep breath, the cold concrete of the hallway feeling like the only solid thing in the world. He felt the pull of her vulnerability. Victoria was a beautiful, powerful woman offering him a world he could never imagine. Most men would have said yes before she even finished the sentence. But Daniel Hayes wasn't most men. He was a father. He was a man of integrity. And he knew that the miracle Victoria was looking for wasn't for her. It was for a fantasy. He looked at her with a profound, soul-deep honesty that made Victoria's breath hitch. He wasn't looking at her as a billionaire anymore. He was looking at her as a person, and that, more than anything, was what she had been craving. The silence that followed was the most important one of the night. It was the moment the architecture of their interaction shifted permanently from a power dynamic to a human one. Victoria waited, her heart pounding against her ribs, hoping for a yes but fearing the truth. She realized that she had offered him everything she had, her power, her wealth, her desire, and for the first time in her life, it wasn't enough to buy the results she wanted. Daniel looked at Victoria for a long time, his gaze steady and unwavering. He didn't see the diamonds or the silk anymore. He saw a woman who was trying to buy her way into a heart she hadn't earned. He saw a woman who was confusing a moment of clarity with a lifetime of commitment. "You don't want me, Victoria," Daniel said calmly. His voice was steady, devoid of anger or judgment. "You want what my life feels like to you from a distance. You're looking at my simplicity and thinking it's an escape from your complexity. But a life isn't a garment you can just try on for a season." That line hit Victoria deeper than any corporate setback ever had. She felt the sting of the truth, the sharp realization that he was right. She had been treating him like a strategic acquisition for her soul. She realized she didn't understand real connection anymore. She had spent so long negotiating that she had forgotten how to just relate. "My life is real," Daniel continued, stepping back and picking up his heavy toolbox. "It's messy, it's difficult, and it belongs to me and my daughter. I've spent 4 years building a world that is safe for her, a world built on honesty and showing up. I can't be part of a world that is built on champagne and shadows. And I can't be a trophy for someone who is afraid to be alone. If I joined your world, Victoria, I would lose the very thing you think you want from me. I would become just another ghost in your penthouse. If real connection matters more than status, type, I choose real." Victoria stood there, the cool air of the hallway suddenly feeling very cold. She felt the emptiness of her penthouse, the hollowness of her board meetings, and the staggering weight of the truth. She realized that she had been trying to acquire Daniel to fix her life the same way he fixed the lights. Quietly, efficiently, and without making a mess. But human beings don't work like circuits. They require time, shared pain, and a willingness to be seen when the lights are off. "I can't be what you're looking for," Daniel said softly. Because if I were yours, I wouldn't be the man you're looking at right now. I'd just be another part of your kingdom. And I like being my own man too much for that. I like knowing that the only person who owns me is a 9-year-old girl with a messy ponytail. He offered her a small, respectful nod, a goodbye that carried no malice, only a final, clear boundary. He turned and walked toward the service elevator. Victoria watched him go, her heart racing. She wanted to shout, to offer him money, to offer him a job, to do anything to keep him in the room. But she stayed silent. She realized that the only way to respect the man she wished was hers was to let him walk away. To try and keep him would be to destroy the very integrity she admired. Daniel left quietly. There was no drama, no shouting, and no cinematic rejection. Just the sound of the elevator doors closing with a dull, mechanical thud. Victoria Laurent stood alone in the concrete hallway for a long time, the distant music of her own party feeling like a foreign language she no longer spoke. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel successful. She felt empty, but it was a new kind of emptiness. It wasn't the hollow ache of loneliness. It was the clean, open space of awareness. She realized that Daniel Hayes had given her a gift far more valuable than his company. He had given her a mirror. He had shown her that her everything was actually nothing if it didn't have a foundation of truth. Final scene, 3 days later. Victoria Laurent is in her minimalist penthouse overlooking the ocean. There is no event tonight. There are no guests, no assistants, and no phones ringing. The room is silent, the only sound being the rhythmic crashing of the waves below. She is sitting on the floor, not on the designer furniture. She is looking at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. She isn't wearing a power suit or diamonds. She is wearing a simple cotton shirt. She looks at the city lights, the lights Daniel Hayes keeps on, and she finally asks herself the question she had been running from for a decade. What do I actually want? She realized that the man she wished was hers was the only one who had been brave enough to say no to her. And in doing so, he had invited her to start saying yes to herself. She picked up a pen and began to write. Not a contract, but a letter to a sister she hadn't spoken to in years. She was beginning the long process of grounding herself. Final voiceover ending. She had everything the world could offer: power, wealth, attention. But none of it felt real until she met someone who didn't want any of it. Daniel Hayes taught her that the most valuable thing you can ever own is your own soul. And sometimes, the person you wish was yours is the one who is brave enough to leave you behind so you can finally find yourself. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Chip Healing Stories, where the truth is found in the quiet moments.